each electron is impacted by the ripples everywhere else. And so in synchronicity, the person or experience or phrase that comes to you out of the blue, your boss tells you to get to work on time. You know, your girlfriend or your boyfriend just told you that too. It's a message from some greater source saying, look, you got to pay attention to this. So synchronicity is like the whole resonant chamber that you live in coming back at you with different feedback.
Welcome to Soul Pod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. I'm your guide, Crystal Cassidy, and together we will bridge the seen and the unseen, science and spirituality, the practical and the profound. From quantum physics to energy centers, near-death experiences to extraterrestrial contact, join us as we delve into the mysteries of consciousness and journey together towards a more awakened, compassionate, and soul-connected world. Find your seat, drop in, and let's go on a journey together. Welcome back, light beings. I'm so excited to welcome you to another episode of Soul Podcast. And today, get ready to geek out a little bit with me. One of the areas that we love to talk about on the pod is science and spirituality and helping us just explore a little bit more beyond what it is that we think we're great for that. And I'm so excited to be joined by Sky Nelson Isaacs. He is a physics educator, speaker, author, and musician. He has a master's degree in physics from San Francisco State University with a thesis in string theory and a BS in physics from UC Berkeley. He has dedicated his life to finding his own sense of purpose as well, beginning as a student of the yogic master Sri Swami Satchidananda when he was less than 5 years old. So we'll have lots to talk about there about the intersection of science and spirituality. He studies the physics of flow and has published several peer-reviewed academic papers on fundamental physics that predict the everyday occurrence of meaningful coincidences, or what we call synchronicity. He also has 2 books out, Living in Flow and Leap to Wholeness. Welcome to the podcast. So before we get into some of the harder sciences, you studied with a yogic master, and I think our audience would love to hear about your journey, whether you want to call that the journey of awakening or of realization, maybe how that, pre-awakening, or whether you want to call it pre or post-awakening, we're always expanding and growing, right? But maybe a little bit about your personal relationship to spirituality. What has that been like for you?
Well, I say I studied with him, but really he was more of a father figure for me. Not that I'm living in that proximity with him, but I was in his community a lot. And when I look at what he models for me, it's this guidance and not any particular teachings, because I didn't go to his lectures as much as I was in his community all the time, from 1 or 2 years old, just immersed in his understanding of the world and the inquiries that he was standing for all the time. And some of the things that he did, I took on a little too much, like this idea that when you're pointing the finger at somebody, you've got your finger pointed, blaming them for something. 3 of your fingers are pointing back at you, one's pointing at them. So there's actually as much blame at you. The idea of projection. We project what we're experiencing as a projection onto somebody else of what we wish was different about ourselves. So that's really been a guiding feature in my own quest for understanding what's the purpose of being here in our lives. And I had experiences not necessarily in the spiritual realm, but in the alternate states realm, as a kid, and just experiencing growing up out in a beautiful, idyllic place called Point Reyes, which is natural. And
oh yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. And so just a whole bunch of influences that were really expanding for me. And I like to think about it in this way, like people who study time, I guess this is a special breed of people that study time because it's so immersed in what we're doing. And if you haven't had experiences of altered time, and just a sense of for me, it's a sense of immediacy or presence, like there's no cognitive processing about what the world is objectively, out there. It's more like right here is what's true, right? And there's these 4 walls in front of me. This idea of presence or immediacy has guided my desire and understanding synchronicity as a experience where something meaningful, really present in this moment is very clear to be true for you, for personal, becomes true for you. And that sense of lack of objectivity, the ultimate subjectivity of that experience is, really begs an explanation and deeper understanding of what time and experience is. And then I studied physics in class in high school, and then as a musician in college, and then had hand injuries. Well, actually, I had hand injuries, which led me to decide to do physics as a major instead, because I liked that and I couldn't play piano 8 hours a day. So I was redirected by life. And I think I got that from Satchidananda as well, this sense of like, do what you're doing in the world and trust the interactions with the world, because it's not, you're not trying to get around the world to get to God or get to spirituality, right? The world is the expression of what you're experiencing. And if there's something you need to experience, it'll happen through your experiences in the world. And synchronicity is this manifestation of something that's physically real. You can measure it, but the meaning of it is personal to you. So it's this intersection between what you're experiencing on the inside that nobody else can really verify, and what's happening on the outside. That connection, I think, is a real key of spirituality for me. And because it's measurable on the outside and also repeatable on the inside, the meditation state can be practiced in the sense of following our dreams or knowing what we're feeling at any given moment. Those are things we can practice, and they can have real effects on the world and the quality of our life. And so there's this way in which synchronicity is this intersection of those two things that can really be practiced and verified.
It seems like it was such a gift to be simply in the presence of a master like you were at such a young age, that you can't help but being in that presence, in that energy of somebody like that, I'm sure was deeply impactful and a really beautiful opportunity and gift. You mentioned, as we kind of edge here deeper into maybe some of the science, I would love to understand better. You mentioned time and presence, and I don't know if you'd call it technically like the standard model of time, maybe. Do you have a different vision of time or perception of time based on what you've learned in physics?
So we started with time as not even thought of before science. We didn't think of what that was. We just were in history, And then Newton and Galileo came along, and Galileo measured time with his pulse to do experiments on motion. Newton thought of the time as just this background clock that's ticking, and everything is measured relative to time, the motion, stars and planets. And then Einstein changed all that with the integration of time and space together in special relativity, where if you go really fast, the measurements of time and space interchange with each other, and they're one physical manifold, they call it. And so that's where we're at, right? And in my studies in the classroom, it was always a bit frustrating for me. We look back on the development, the history of science, because I've taught physics in high school classrooms, for my 8th or 9th year coming up, maybe 10th. And you always start from the beginning and go through the whole history, right? And you look at the outstanding problems that haven't been resolved, and time is one of them. Time, in the 1930s, we developed quantum mechanics, which is largely based on your old model of time, not Einstein's. And then we did develop quantum field theory, which is a mix of the two, but it's had some piecemeal aspects to it, things like integrals, Feynman integrals and stuff that are piecemeal ways to get answers that don't really fully understand what we're doing. And so time is baked, this old notion of time is baked into the physics, and then we never go back and sort of rethink it. What I think is really fascinating for me is like, there's this thing called the frequency domain, and everybody learns about this at some point, even just by having a stereo. With the high treble frequencies and the bass frequencies, you can adjust the balance of the high and low and get the different sounds. And that's in the frequency domain. And what's amazing about this is you can take a sound, like a song that's maybe 5 minutes long. So it's like a stretching from left to right on your timeline. Time is like a straight line, let's say. And the left side of the song is, the recording maybe on your hard disk, because, the left side is 0 seconds and the right side is like 5 minutes. So if you listen to some James Taylor or Ozzy Osbourne or whatever, and it's going from 0 seconds to 5 minutes on the right, left to right. And the data in between is relative to the time in the song. But the way they actually store the data, and this is true for video too now, because we're really the video era, they convert it into this frequency domain via the Fourier transform, which is, I think, the most beautiful piece of mathematics that I understand. I mean, there's a lot I don't understand, so there's probably more beautiful stuff there, but it's really beautiful. And it converts it into its frequencies. So now you have a file that's the same size length. It's still the same width, 5 minutes worth of audio. But no longer does the left side correspond to 0 seconds and the right side correspond to 5 minutes. It's not time anymore. So this span is now a different scale. It's not a time scale. And if I ask you, where's the beginning of the song? You couldn't point to it. The audio data corresponding to the sound that's played at the beginning of the song in time is mixed throughout the data set. It's no longer at a point. So time is no longer at a point, and there's no specific times in the music anymore. The middle of the song, what was the middle, is now also spread out throughout the audio. And so you get this representation of the world that is both timeless and also spaceless, yet it's perfectly legitimate description of the song, because you can invert the whole song back to space-time and get the thing back. There's a representation of reality which has no space and time. Perfectly legitimate. What does that mean for the physics of our actual world, this timeless representation of the world? And, in classes in my master's degree, it was like learning that quantum mechanics is the mathematics of the frequency domain and the space domain, because spatial domain is space and time. Frequency domain is momentum and energy. And all of physics is basically this relationship between time and energy and space and momentum. And what we call the uncertainty principle by Heisenberg is this balance between those two domains. All that physics just comes beautifully out of this relationship between those two. So there's some other aspects to it, but holograms are this model of, you look into a hologram and you see an image that's illusion in the hologram. And as you move your face, the film that you're looking at stays put, but the image inside of it moves. And there's this distinction between what you're looking at through the film, what you think you're looking at is the image in the film, dancing behind the film, but you're actually looking at the film. So there's this space of the thing you're actually looking at and the thing that you think you're looking at. So I think that there's this mathematics of these two distinct times and spaces, where there's the one that's measurable, what you and I are experiencing, that's subjective. It's based upon our observations as a reporting conscious human being. I don't know where consciousness comes in, but it definitely has to do with the world is subjective to my perception. It's relational. And then there's this, so that's the observable time that you actually experience. And there's the underneath that, this unobservable time, which is how the universe evolves when nobody's watching it. And they're both real in the mathematics, but you just have to distinguish carefully between the different types of qualities of what you're calculating. Which one of those can you actually measure? Which one of those is just a hypothetical background situation that nobody actually has ever witnessed? And similar in the sense of spirituality, there's a sense in which the universe there's a presence that is omnipresent, right? There's a consciousness that is omnipresent. Well, that's the nature of this frequency domain, right? You make a change to the high frequencies in the frequency domain, and that decrease in the sound at a high pitch decreases everywhere in the song, non-locally, right? Sort of throughout time and space, the change happens. So there's a way in which I sense that the world is physically separate all around us. We're separate from people. The stars and planets are separate from us. That's just not true in this other representation. And so how do we make sense of that fact that that's not true in every possible way to describe the universe?
Fascinating. I have so many questions. I'm very curious about this holographic kind of perspective, because it seems like if you have the film and then you have the light that is creating the experience that you're perceiving, but it's not truly there because you can remove that. Is the film kind of representative of the background element of the universe that we aren't really able to perceive, but it's kind of the backdrop of experience?
Well, that's a good question. The process by which I say these things is more about the coming from the math and then seeing what it looks like in the physical visual.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it feels like I know it's accurate versus it's like some model that I'm creating out of my head. So if you look at this Schrodinger equation, which is the equation that Erwin Schrodinger, who was very deep in the Upanishads, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Very
Interesting.
Eastern religion guy. There's this integral, which is like you're adding up all the contributions from a system over time of the energy in the system over time. Integrals are what we do in calculus, typically. You do this integral, which is like this mathematical operation. And you do it, you're integrating over this thing called time, which is the time variable. But in the Fourier transform, you have to make sure you integrate always from negative infinity time to positive infinity time, like over all time. Time actually is not, it goes away. You're adding up the time everywhere, and so it just drops out. What's left is your frequency that you're calculating. That's why you can get from the time domain to the frequency domain and get rid of the time, because you've actually counted for all the time components, contributions. And it goes out of your math altogether. And when you have a calculation where your integral doesn't go all the way from negative to positive infinity over all time, it goes from like time equals 0 to time equals 10 seconds, then you have these measurable moments, right? And then the number t equals 0 seconds is an actual time in the history of the universe right now. And the t equals 10 seconds is an actual time history of the universe, like right now. Those are things you can point to and pin down. And as people, I can say, be here at that time, and you'll be able to do that. But with the other variable of t equals negative infinity, if you take any value, that's not something you can actually say has a definite value. So this leads to this distinction between things that have definite values, the universe which has definite values, and the multiverse which has an infinite number of possibilities that are never observed, and this time variable that's never observed in sort of an analogous way. So yes, I think what I'm coming to understand is a good metaphor for the distinction between measurable time experiences that are subjective and this background of sort of objective clocking reality, but it's never, it's part of the mechanism of the universe that's not perceived. Is like, what we see in the hologram versus the film itself. But, having some idea that there's a film or a layer elsewhere in physical space, or some kind of physical notion of what that looks like, is not so helpful, because a hologram is a metaphor.
It makes sense, yeah.
Film, but and the mathematics is it's a great representation of the same mathematics, but it doesn't mean that there's some physical layer outside. And that's what I don't like about the holographic principle, that put forward in quantum field theory right now, because it does imply that they rely on this one piece of the hologram, which is that the 3 dimensions are projected onto the 2 dimensions, or vice versa. It's like this gravity is the 5th dimensional substructure for a 4-dimensional space-time. And that's just one little aspect of what the holographic principle does that's, very catchy. But I think what I'm trying to get at is a way in which the mathematics of both quantum mechanics and the physical world and holograms are totally the same as each other. The model is a fully holographic, understanding of what is time and space, not just this one little, dimensional reduction thing, 5 dimensions to 4 dimensions. And is it called ADS CFT, anti-de Sitter space versus conformal field theory? A very common studied aspect of the holographic principle today. Beautiful. But that's all, way out there, very conceptual.
Yeah, I love it. In one of your talks, you mentioned that properties, you were talking about the nature of like properties, which I think is related to matter and what we consider to be real. You said that properties don't exist in and of themselves prior to measurement. And so this really goes back to one of the fundamentals of quantum physics. And I'm curious, how do you think about the wave function collapse and the measurement problem currently, given your research, and how that may connect to consciousness, if at all?
I love it. So, and David Merman is an author I love, who did work related to Carlo Rovelli's relational model. And Merman talks about correlations between data are real. Correlata, what they correlate is not.
Can you further explain that?
Yeah. The fancy way of saying the relationships between things are real, measurable things. The things themselves, the entities themselves, are not. An electron is nothing, but an electron relative to another electron has a field and a relationship and forces. It's a really important part of, when you become a physicist and think like a physicist, you think about what do I take for granted, and what am I actually being told by the observations. And what we take for granted is this idea that there's actually things out there, because there are, right? I mean, I can touch the screen and I'm talking to the microphone, but we can't imagine what it's like to have only that thing and nothing else around it. So we don't even think about what the relationship means. And there's some metaphors to this that are really important for society. Like, to think that I can understand what it would be like to be a person of black skin in American culture and have to deal with, navigate societies, financially or economically. And that I can have any sense of what that is not possible in the sense that I can't ever put myself in that situation. So I can look at the facts, what I'm told, but I can't ever really fully grasp what that reality is like, because we can't understand what it's like to be in a situation that we're not in.
Mm-hmm.
And an electron is not, it's defined completely by its relationship to other things. So we're immersed in our society defined by the relationships we have to other things. And those relationships are fully contextualized based on who we are and where we come from.
Beautiful relationships above the kind of like above the definition or the parameter or the property. That really kind of speaks to, on a societal level, the polarity that maybe we experience is from the fact that we're perceiving from a very specific vantage
Yeah.
point. And so it feels like to me that if we kind of step out of the science for a moment into the cultural and the psychological and the spiritual, it seems like empathy becomes such a powerful and important component of seeking to understand the experiences that are not your own. And
Yeah.
that's how a new, almost like how a new relationship is formed, right?
Yeah. Well, my new book that I'm working on now is about polarization, because I think that this model is really important to apply to how we perceive.
Mm.
We're perceiving through this apparatus in our brains, and what we perceive determines how we interpret the situation. The situations are often ambiguous. What does that person mean by what they said? It can depend on the context. It does depend on the context, always. And so, and then when I take that in and I have an interpretation of what's said to me and I respond with something back, and I sort of generate this new energy or direction of conversation, I'm creating the synchronicities for myself that I'm going to experience next, right? And I'm either coming back with an open inquiry about why did you say that to me, or a definite like accusation of you shouldn't have said that to me, and I'm going to get what I expect in some way, from this person. So if we can understand how that happens in our brains, and then how synchronicity sort of makes manifest those various situations through coincidences later, I think we can start to see some of the systems in our world, how they have gotten created and reinforced to lock into negative feedback cycles.
Fascinating. Physics helping us understand the discontent in our society. I don't know if I've heard anybody else talk about it quite like that.
I noticed it in my life, so I try to apply.
Yeah, that's very, very
I
cool.
mean, let me think about the example in the classroom. I was not teaching for 20 years after my last teaching job, and I did other things. My daughter went to high school for her first day of high school and came back to report on her physics class and said, "We have no teacher." And I said to my wife, "I'm not going to take that. I'm going to do that job. Like, I'm not going back to the
Mm.
classroom." But ultimately, I realized, I was really scared of going back into teaching because it's really hard work, and various reasons, personal, why I felt insecure about it. But it was a chance to be with my daughter in the classroom and a chance to sort of understand what life was trying to get me to do with my life again, listen carefully to the directions. And it's been the most important decision I ever made in a way. My relationship with my daughter, my experience with myself, and feeling appreciated by my students and colleagues. And how often in life are we in situations that we reject because we think we understand what's needed or what we need or what others mean. And we reject those situations with certainty, when from a different angle, that hologram might look really different. Like from this angle that I have now, I'm like, oh, that hologram looks like the best opportunity to feel loved and appreciated and have fans and make a difference in the world, and, have just a place I can go where I feel like I belong. Different angle, it looks completely different, but I couldn't see that at first.
That's fascinating. And shout out to the teachers out there that are taking those roles and
Yeah.
supporting this next generation in such important, powerful ways. With that personal experience where, you had this experience of like, I love that you mentioned certainty, because I find the concept of certainty so interesting when it comes to both physics and spirituality. And I'm more and more convinced that doesn't, that uncertainty is more the nature of reality
Hmm.
than we may think. And that requires such a different relationship with the world because we're so predisposed biologically for certainty. Yeah, I would love to hear from you about the science of synchronicity where you've spent so much time. Can you help us understand how synchronicity isn't just a woo-woo concept, possibly?
We'll try. And on the topic of collapse, you said collapse of the wave function. I'm going to be
Yeah.
purposely bridging into the physical world, which is not something people would talk about as quantum mechanical. I think we can make the argument in the long term, but I'm not going to do that here. But I'm going to talk about using the principles of we've learned from quantum mechanics in principle, applying them metaphorically to life. So this is not actual science for a moment. But this notion of collapse, I think, and I think we can extend it maybe in the future, but collapse is this notion where you have a system that's in an uncertain state or multiple possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So you observe it or interact with it in some way so you can determine what it's really doing. The minute you observe it and interact with it, it takes some real state. So before you looked at it, you couldn't say, was it in that state? But when you did look, it was. You're just honest with yourself that before you looked, you really had nothing to say about it. You assume that it was the same now as it was then. But that's an assumption. So as a scientist, we want to back away from our assumptions and say beforehand, we describe it as a sum of the possibilities. And after we interact with it, it's definite.
And this was proven by Schrodinger's experiment, right?
It was a theoretical understanding of something that they were finding in experiments. Yeah, in the 20s and 30s. And it's definitely a part of our world. They've done experiments with entangled particles, for instance, that come from different parts of the galaxy and stars on opposite sides of us coming together and intersecting in a device after a couple hundred years of traveling or whatever, and displaying qualities of correlation with each other as if they were somehow connected. But they came from
Fascinating.
opposite sides of the sky. So without getting too much into that, because I might even confuse myself.
It's pretty mind-blowing. Yeah.
But the idea is there's these multiple possibilities describing a system that when you actually relate to it or interact with it, you only get one reality,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes the one you experience. And I'll give a quick example that is maybe relatable. There's this famous experiment where you shine light through a slit or two slits side by side in a paper, and you get a pattern on the screen behind it, which is not just a bright spot from like a flashlight, but interfering bright and dark spots because the two slits relate to each other and cause darkness in some places and light in others. I do a great lab with this with my students where we take note cards, make a chain of index cards representing a big wave of light. You have them starting from two different points on the screen and going to across the board to some other point where they meet. And you show that there's places where the waves line up together. I can bend my hand backwards. When they line up opposite, when the waves line up opposite, they cancel. You get zero light. You have darkness. But then they did this experiment in Japan. I think Toshiba or some company did this version of that experiment with just single electrons. So electrons
Mm-hmm.
as particles, single things, not waves. And so they shown that they dimmed the intensity so much that only one at a time went through the slits. And how can one electron go through two slits? Well, that's what we're saying. There's two possibilities that are neither of them are actually true. And that one electron landed on the other side of the slits on this screen and made a flash in the photography. And that doesn't tell you anything, right? You have to do that a million times. And as you do it a million times with these individual points of light, you see that the random places where they land are not actually random. Overall, these million electrons that are all independent of each other at different times in the history, yet they land on the screen in a pattern of bright and dark spots, which implies that there's some relationship between them caused by the spatial layout of the slits. So these things that are independent particles, we think of as that independent particles, are actually defined by the correlations between them, not the correlata themselves.
Back to that
Yeah,
concept of relationship.
yeah, the relationships. And so it's not something when you measure it on the flash and the screen that you actually get collapse its state into that one state, but it came from a state that was more structured before that, where all the electrons had a certain pattern overall that collapsed into what they were seen as. And so I want to take that idea and apply it a little bit more broadly to this idea of collapse in society. I'm going off the cuff here, but this is something that's come up in my writing recently. Um,
Yeah.
I started revisiting the 9/11 attacks in New York many years ago. And Barbara Lee is this U.S. representative who I greatly admire, who was the only person to vote against action in Iraq, military force in Iraq, and broadly any sort of broad authorization of military force. Why did she do that? And why did nobody else do that, vote against it? And in those moments, because we did ultimately find out that there was no legitimate cause for invading Iraq that is different from Afghanistan. This is 2 years after the 2003, 2004. But there's a wave of emotion in the country, people being really, really upset, obviously, through this horror that had happened to us, and wanted to do something about it in a way that was tangible, that they could feel. And so we sort of collapsed in a way onto this decision and this reality that we were sure was true as a collective, which Barbara Lee did not. But generally in society, there's this groupthink. And what I would be advocating for in my version of the world would be understanding we want to react with our pain, to our wounds, and we want to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
But in the hologram, we're looking from an angle right now. And a little bit later, I'm looking from a different angle. I might notice something I didn't notice before. And to be humble, like I take this from my relationship at home with my wife and my daughter. Like, my daughter says, I don't want to wear a jacket today. And I'm like, you have to wear a jacket. And I force her to wear a jacket. And then it turns out it's totally sunny and beautiful all day. And I'm like, from a different angle, I was being totally unreasonable. And I've seen that again and again in my life personally. So knowing how certain I can be about something and then realizing later that it looks different from a different angle, it's given me some pause with my spiritual practice with Satchidananda. I'm pointing the finger at you, but 3 fingers are pointing back at me. What am I not aware of here that could be influencing reality and my lack of objectivity?
I love that question. What am I not aware of that could be affecting my perception of reality? It's such a great question to ask.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
You can't see what you can't see. You can't see the negative
You can't
space.
see what you can't see. Yeah. I'm curious with the electrons in the relationship. The electrons, they're pure potential, right? Before they're measured. So
Everything. Yeah.
yeah. So as the electrons go through these slits, they're all of them. How can you, maybe this goes to like a fundamental misunderstanding I have of physics, but how can you measure
The rest
each
of
of
us.
the individual? Yeah. How do you see where I'm going?
Well, you're asking the right question.
Yeah.
It has an answer. You have to form a new concept of reality around what you know not to be true. It's not true that there's one particle that is existing independently of the others at a given moment.
That's
What else?
what's,
What can replace that? I don't have an answer for that.
yeah. Is that where a field comes into play?
Yeah, I think the field idea comes from that, right? It's a construct that physicists made up to explain
Explain that.
that idea. And it's not wrong, but it's also not the only way to think of it.
So I would love to hear more about your perception of synchronicity, because I know many in our audience, especially as you expand your capacity of awareness and bring more consciousness into your experience. One thing I hear, and it's been true of my life as well, I hear this a lot from others, is that you tend to have increased coincidences or synchronicities in your life, whether you want to call those angel numbers or the right person at the right time, and things that just seem sometimes unbelievable can start to flow into your experience. And you also talk a lot about flow and synchronicity being very connected. I would love to understand more about how you think of this.
Well, it is all connected in a way. I mean, in my understanding of the time in the hologram, that in the other domain goes away completely. My second book is called Leap to Wholeness: How the World is Programmed to Help Us Heal, Grow, and Adapt. And the reason I was interested in studying and talking about wholeness is because we live in a society that's currently really focused on reductionism.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you think synchronicity is amazing, you're basically immersed in reductionism, because in a reductionist world, Synchronicity is magic, and there's no connection across time or space.
Ooh, that's a good point.
So you're accepting this reductionist model, which is great. It gives us chemistry and lots of great technology.
Mm.
Although, computers are based on a transistor, which is based on a non-local physics of quantum mechanics, which is not reductionist. So, touche.
That's hilarious. Touche, universe.
And what I showed, like in the talk I gave at TEDx at Berkeley last year, is a really clear model of like, look, when you do the mathematics that you do in image processing, that you use for AI, recognizing dogs and babies on photographs and stuff like that, facial recognition, it's all based on the Fourier transform of an image. Same mathematics. And when you do that, you're not looking at each pixel separately. You're looking at the patterns that exist across the field, the image. And so you're looking at this non-local relationship across space. Non-local means not just what's right around you, but if I have a picture of a building and I want to use the frequency domain to remove some building from, it's a cityscape, so there's many buildings. Remove one building, I can't do it. With pixels, I can just remove the pixels that I want, and they don't have any effect on their neighbors. But with the Fourier transform, if I remove one section, it creates ripples everywhere else, kind of like that electron going through the slits. Each electron is impacted by the ripples everywhere else. And so in synchronicity, just metaphorically for a second, think about like the person or experience or phrase that comes to you out of the blue, maybe even from your enemy, right? Your boss tells you to get to work on time. You're like, screw you. I don't need to listen to you. But your girlfriend or your boyfriend just told you that too. It's a message from some greater source saying, look, you got to pay attention to this. You're going to be in some things that you care about if you don't start paying attention to being on time. It's a message for me. Then, that message is coming from all different directions, situations all around you. And it's contextual. It's not just the person that's talking to you there and their need for you to be different. It's also a contextual reflection of your experience in the world and what you're doing that is being reflected back to you. So synchronicity is like the whole resonant chamber that you live in coming back at you with different feedback. It's like a feedback cycle.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And how does flow come into that equation?
Well, when you listen to the feedback in your life, and this is where certainty gets in the way, right? If I'm certain that the person that I'm talking to is out to get me, then I'm going to hear everything they say through that filter of like, I'm going to reject that. But my parent, who I don't have a good history with, can still offer me useful things to pay attention to, even if it's not intentional. Like they can just be the messenger, right? And so when I can see what's happening to me from a non-personal place and take it in as information that helps me tune into what I want to do next, and that's the experience of flow for me. Mm. Because I'm tuning into what I want to do. It's reminding me, oh yeah, I wanted to go out to on that trip, or I wanted to go, take that job, or I wanted to go take out the garbage. And it's not about them and what they said anymore. It's about what I take that to mean in my life, in flow with the universe.
Right, the meaning. It really creates this increase in curiosity in your experience, because it's almost like if you think of it that way, it opens up the aperture a bit to be more open to life and curious about the information that you're receiving and whatever context that information ends up coming in. That's really beautiful.
I'm going to embarrass my friend, but I went out to see the Indigo Girls last week with
Cool.
my wife and a couple of her friends. And I was talking to my wife afterwards. She's one of the most curious people I know, which is why I love her. One of the reasons. And but her friend Glenda I just said, she's so curious, always wanting to know more about what's going on for you. The opposite of that is judgment, right? There's no judgment about like, that's weird. But it's like, and my new book is about looking at polarization and all these conversations I've had with people around the country during the political campaigns and saying, why would they feel that way? Why would they think that way? Because I believe from a different angle of the hologram, they're just like me. They're seeing different facts and different perspectives on the data, same data. And they're coming to different conclusions, different contextual places they've lived and grown up in, different industries they're part of. But they are like me. And so instead of the judgment of I know that I'm fundamentally, this value is correct, Maybe we can share a value and still look at the world in a different way because of our contextual angle on it. Curiosity.
Curiosity. I love that. Well, I could talk to you all day. Would love to have you back on the podcast sometime.
Love it.
There's a few rapid fire questions that we ask all of our guests. So, are you game?
Yeah.
All right. What is consciousness to you?
The ability to respond quickly on the spot.
Whatever comes up.
That's kind of it. Consciousness is maybe the ability to narrate a story about what you experience.
Beautiful. And what is source, God, or oneness to you?
So I had a dream. I'll say this quickly. I had a dream that helped launch me on this physics path of inquiry, which was a voice in the dream said to me, "You don't seem separate to me, and I don't seem unified to you." So source, God, and oneness is a different angle on the same reality.
Ooh, I'm going to sit with that one. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And if it's 100 years in the future, and I have a feeling you might have a longer answer for this, so go for it. If it's 100 years in the future, what would you wish for humanity?
I've been writing about the projection as the hardest thing we have to overcome. Projecting my understanding, my filter, my feelings onto what I'm seeing in you, assuming you're that way, and treating you that way. And it creates this tangled web of missed communications. It's just heartbreaking and painful. We can get through that. We can get around that and see ourselves in the mirror as we're talking and realize that's me. And I don't know what else could there be because I can't see what I can't see. I can't see the background. I can only see the foreground. But I know that there is a background that I can't see. Even just knowing that there's a background I can't see and all I'm seeing is the foreground and trusting that in the past I've just waited a little bit and I've seen the other angle later allows me to not react so quickly.
Beautiful.
And then create the next painful interaction and I start to ease off the generation of pain and I start to ease into more healing.
Yeah, one more question for you. What is healing to you?
And the other word I was going to say was repair.
Repair.
A rupture is when communication breaks down and we say things that we don't really mean that aren't accurate. They feel accurate, but they're not really touching into the whole picture of who we are. When we have the whole picture more in our hearts, and we can start to say what's really true, we start to repair those relationships. Now, what we need to do is be on a path towards repair. We don't have to repair everything.
Be on a path.
Just turn around in that direction.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge with us today. I deeply appreciate it. Where can people find you if they want to connect further?
Thank you so much to you as well for holding this space. My website is synchronicityinstitute.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And my books are Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. Second one is Leap to Wholeness, How the World is Programmed to Help Us Heal, Grow, and Adapt. They're both all over the place. You can go to Amazon, but you can also go to your local bookstore and request them and support local books. And my third book is in the process. I won't say the title yet, but it's about polarization and how to take these ideas, make them active.
You're doing such important work in the world. Thank you, Sky Nelson Isaacs, for joining us today on Soul Podcast. And we'll see you next time, Light Being.
Thank you.
Thank you for journeying with us today, Light Being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we'd love to offer you even more spiritual guidance and daily rituals. This week, we launched the biggest update since SoulPod first hit the App Store. To celebrate, we're offering you a free month of SoulPod with the code Step Into the Portal. Your SoulPod home has been completely reimagined with even more ease, more rhythm, and more room to grow. Now you can revisit past journeys, save your favorite rituals, and build personalized playlists that move with your energy. And at the heart of it all, portals. Portals are guided mini journeys, flexible, soulful spaces designed to meet you right where you are. Beginners welcomes you into the heart of soulfulness, no experience needed. Soulscapes offers looping soundscapes for solo self-guided practice. And Integration holds you gently after transformation, offering grounding and expansion. Download the app or tap the link in our show notes to begin. We'll see you inside.